Good morning. It is a great honor to be here to introduce our keynote speaker, Gerard Puccio, Department Chair and Professor at the International Center for Studies in Creativity at Buffalo State, the world's only program to offer a Master's of Science degree in creativity. For this symposium, Professor Gerard Puccio has been awarded the Joseph G. Astman Distinguished Scholar Award. This award was established in 1985 in recognition of the outstanding role of the late founder of the Hofstra Cultural Center. Dr. Astman was a humanist, a cultural comparatist, and an international scholar who had the vision to establish the Hofstra Cultural Center as a forum for international scholarly thought. I am Martha McPhee from the English department, where I teach creative writing, fiction. I am a novelist, and as such, live a creative life, and know firsthand the benefits of being able to think creatively. 2 years ago, however, feeling the impact of STEM and questioning how my field and the arts generally are relevant in a society and academic structure that favors the sciences, I went on a quest to understand the role and contributions of the arts. In this quest, I discovered the work of Gerard Puccio, in particular a vibrant and informative TEDx talk titled Creativity is a Life Skill. But of course, he is also the author of many papers and 3 books, The Innovative Team, Creative Leadership, Creativity Rising. In recognition of his excellence in scholarship, Dr. Puccio received the State University of New York's Chancellor's Recognition Award for Research Excellence, as well as the President's Medal for Scholarship and Creativity. But it was the TEDx talk that first caught my attention, beginning immediately with the image of a Bengali tiger poised to attack. How does a person, feeble in comparison, outsmart the cat? And so began his discussion of divergent and convergent thinking, the ways we need to both conform and think independently, how they work together to solve the big problems of being here on Earth. If I had any doubts about the practical relevance of creativity, I not only felt reassured and reminded, I felt emboldened. All of us have it within us, as the neuroscience of creativity has demonstrated. We are all hardwired for creative thinking. It's not part of some exclusive realm for poets, artists, etc. It can be learned, and Puccio is a leading thinker in helping make creative thinking a core competency in universities. And in so doing, he is helping the students of those universities acquire the skills that are in high demand in business and government and politics and law and elsewhere, so that these students can be poised to help solve the increasingly complex problems of the world. Here is a bracing fact of the world before us. The old solutions no longer suffice for a world grown more complex. Puccio reminds us, if we want to move the species forward, much indeed rests upon the continued practice of poetry, fiction, and the creative arts. The arts will become the way we build a creative thinking musculature to better answer the puzzlements that affect our lives and to help answer the larger challenges that face our culture. Please join me in welcoming Gerard Puccio. Thanks.
Good morning. Well, it's an absolute honor to be here on my way flying to JFK this morning. I had a flashback to 29 years ago. I was this close to being a PhD student at Hofstra. I was accepted at Hofstra and the University of Manchester in England and decided to go overseas for my experience. But now I'm here finally at Hofstra 29 years later. So thank you for giving me the honor to share some of my work with you. So we're going to look at what creative thinking is and why it's considered by many to be a 21st century success skill. Looking across the audience, I see some younger faces, so I'm assuming that there are a good number of students here. Who are students? Okay. So you're out of class, But I'm going to start the presentation with a quiz. This quiz is going to have you think about sure can. The green light is on.
There we go, now we're on.
So I'm wired now. I don't have to shout. So we're going to start with the quiz. Testing. I've got a green light. That was not me. Check. Working better now? I'll just keep talking. Working better now? Okay, I'm afraid to put it in my pocket though. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to look at some occupations and make a decision. Simple sorting exercise. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Thumbs up means that occupation is likely to still exist in a decade or two. Thumbs down if you believe that occupation is likely to disappear. This is based on the research that came out 2 years ago from the School of Education in Oxford, where they took the 700 and some job listings from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they created an algorithm where they could predict the probability that a job would become automated and therefore is not future-proof. So let's try this out. The thumbs up would indicate that there's a 1% chance of computerization, meaning 99% likelihood that the job will still exist a decade or two out. Thumbs down, there's a 95% chance that it will become computerized and likely for that job to disappear. Now, you get to do this in collaboration, so I'm going to ask you to speak with someone. If you're not seated next to someone, I'm going to ask you to invite a neighbor to come over and sit near you so that you can think through this with at least one other person. So if you need to adjust your seats, go ahead and do that. Be a friendly neighbor. Okay, so let's warm ourselves up. I'm going to throw you a softball. Truck driver. Thumbs up or thumbs down? What's the probability that this job will still exist in a decade to 2 decades out? That would be a thumbs up. Thumbs down, it's likely to be replaced, be automated. Okay, this is just the warm-up. This is the softball question. So I'm going to reveal the answer, but you can show me by holding your thumbs up or thumbs down. So polling the audience, thumbs up or thumbs down. Do you think it'll still exist? Thumbs up, thumbs down if you believe it will not exist. 95% chance of being computerized or automated. The answer is thumbs down. That was the softball. Here are 6 other occupations. 3 of them are predicted to still exist a decade to 2 decades out from now. 3 have a 95% probability of becoming automated or computerized. Quick 2-minute conversation. How would you sort those? I'm going to move us along. I'm going to reveal the answers to you, and we'll see how your thinking corresponds with the research out of Oxford University. So here's how they sort. Elementary school teachers, psychologists, human resource managers, thumbs up. There's only a 1% probability that those will be computerized. Sports officials, cooks, tax preparers, 95% probability that those will become automated. Here's a table that shows you some additional occupations, 95% probability in the left column of becoming computerized, 1% probability in the right column here. And if you're an NPR fan, as I am, I was listening to On Point on Monday, and these authors, Susskind and Susskind, wrote a book that was just released called The Future of Professions, where they made an argument even among the professions, doctors and lawyers and accountants who believe they can't be replaced by computers. If you look at tax preparation now, how many of us do tax preparation online? Even these occupations are being threatened. So what is it about these occupations, specifically the occupations that are less likely to be computerized? These researchers analyzed and discovered several characteristics which they believe render these occupations more future-proof. What do you think it is about these occupations? So one of the things, say it nice and loud, creativity. What a surprise, and that's the topic I happen to be discussing. So one of the things that they discovered when they did their analysis in terms of the responsibilities and tasks in these occupations, they didn't use the word creativity, but they require imagination. The other common characteristic is that they also require high social intelligence, high social skills. So they suggested that those two qualities help to make occupations future-proof. So, as been up since 3 o'clock, so I sort of feel like I have jet lag. If I happen to fall asleep during my presentation, someone in the front row, please nudge me. So this International Center for Studies in Creativity, one of the things that may be going through your mind, anyone here ever been to Buffalo? Okay, so a number of you have. You may be wondering, why would the International Center for Studies in Creativity be in Buffalo? Why Buffalo, New York? Right? Shouldn't it be in New York City? Or Chicago, Toronto, Paris, London, some more cosmopolitan community? Well, there's a gentleman, a visionary, who's the reason why we're in Buffalo. And his name is Alex Osborne. He's a famous New Yorker, as in New York City, New Yorker, born in Brooklyn. Who here has ever heard of Alex Osborne? Of course you should. You're one of my students. Famous New Yorker. No. How about a book that he wrote that was on the New York Times bestseller list? Applied Imagination. Translated into half a dozen different languages. A few people in the back, great. How about a popular creativity methodology called brainstorming? How many have ever heard of brainstorming? Okay, so let me connect the dots. Alex Osborne was the founder of an advertising agency called BBD&O. Still exists today, Batten, Barton, Dursey, and Osborne. If you've seen Mad Men, that program is based on his ad agency. Osborne, as an ad man, even before he became an ad man, when he was a journalist, he challenged himself to come up with one new idea every day, because he believed the key to success is imagination. In his ad agency, he used it as a laboratory to test whether you could deliberately provoke and promote creative thinking. That's where he tested his ideas around brainstorming and other methodologies. And they became so successful, he wrote this book called Applied Imagination. Here's the interesting thing about Alex Osborne. While he was a businessman, what he was most proud of was his role in being a pioneer of creativity education. Because he believed, and by the way, if Osborne's not familiar to you, we're talking 1920s, 30s, 40s. His book was published in 1953. But even back then, 60 years ago, as a businessman, he believed that education did more to rob children of their creativity than to promote it. And he thought that was a shame. Because he believed creativity was necessary for success professionally and in life. And so he started this movement, the Creative Education Movement, and founded an organization called the Creative Education Foundation. That foundation then created our department at Buffalo State. So some fast facts about our program. We've been around since 1967. As Martha mentioned, we offer the world's only Master of Science degree in creativity. There are about a half a dozen other graduate programs now in creativity, but they tend to be Master of Arts programs. We offer a graduate certificate in creativity and change leadership. We believe there's a very important connection between creativity and leadership. So a good deal of our curriculum focuses on leadership. Because of our international reputation, we offer a program for distance learners. We now have over 600 alumni who graduated from our certificate program and our Master of Science degree program. And if you ever visit Buffalo State, we have what we believe is the world's largest collection of books on the topic of creativity, some 5,000 volumes, 5,000 books specifically on creativity. So that's a little bit about the International Center for Studies in Creativity. Now, it's a Master of Science degree program. It's 33 credit hours. It's thousands of hours of study, and now I have 40 minutes left. I'm just scratching the surface. And I'm also receiving a microphone. Is this on? Test, test, test. Test, test. While we're figuring this out, I'm just going to carry on. So here's the roadmap for the session. Given the fact that we're scratching the surface, what I want to dig into, albeit we have a brief period of time, is understanding what creativity is and why it's important. If you attended this morning's session, I'll be building on some of the comments that were shared and research that were shared this morning. I'll then move into how we can develop creativity, and I'll share with you some research around something that we teach called creative problem solving, CPS for short. And then I'll share some evidence for the value of creativity education by going into a research study that we just wrapped up, in fact, last week. This will be the first audience to see the full results from that research study. So that's the plan. Is that okay? Good. You don't have a choice. That's the plan. Okay, so I want you to wrap your heads around this a little bit while I have information to share with you. What I find is best, especially in terms of adult learners, is that it's useful to engage you in the presentation. So although it's a keynote and while I'll be delivering information, I'd also like to get some ideas from you. So here's the question. What is creativity? What I'd like you to do is to talk with a partner. I'm just going to give you a minute to do this. If you have something to write with, I'd like you to draw a line down the center of your sheet of paper. If you have a computer screen and you can create 2 columns, then create 2 columns because there'll be 2 questions. Here's the first question. When you hear the word creativity, what does it mean to you? What words and phrases do you associate with the word creativity? You have 2 minutes, go. Okay, let me interrupt you and let me poll the audience. I'll take a few samples of your thoughts. I may react to some of them and connect them to the creativity literature, by the way. There are a dozen refereed journals in the field of creativity, so it's a vibrant academic community. So when you hear the word creativity, what were the words or phrases you associated with creativity? Don't all speak at once. Yes. Elegant. In fact, one of the characteristics of a creative product is elegance. What else? Yes. Creativity is a misnomer. So say more about that. Give us a little explanation. Yeah. Good.
Honest, as a creative writer,
Mm-hmm.
I never, and I don't know a creative writer who ever does, say, hi, I'm a creative writer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's often the word we might hear if somebody wants to be generous with us, and say, oh, you're so creative.
Right, right.
And my impulse is to want to stomp my feet, or theirs, because the creative part feels like the 1%, and the rest is hard work.
Yeah, well, 1% imagination, 99% inspiration, right? Was that
No,
Perspiration.
perspiration?
Yes, thank you.
What did I say?
Right.
Sometimes I can't think and talk at the same time. So I agree. In fact, when you look at the creative process, it's not just the idea. What allows you to get eventually to the product is the hard work. And that's a common, if you will, fallacy that it's enough just to have an idea. It's not. Creativity is hard work. Yeah, yeah. Great point. Others. Yes, all the way in the very back.
Abstract thinking and lateral thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Outside the box.
Yep. Abstract thinking, lateral thinking, thinking outside the box, thinking in original ways. In fact, lateral thinking, Edward de Bono, who's a pioneer in the field of creativity education, talks about how most education teaches us to think vertically, to dig deep, very narrowly, versus lateral thinking, which is being able to shift in different directions. So that's a common term in the field of creativity. I'm noticing I'm selecting only people on this side of the room. So let me move to this side. Yes?
Freedom and free association.
Freedom, free association. Sure. So one of the qualities that we know about the creative environment, classroom or organizational environment, is an ability to have autonomy and some discretion. So freedom is a word that's described relative to the environment that inspires creative thinking. Let me share with you a few definitions that I particularly like. So we're going to take a closer look at creativity. One that I came across when I started my PhD was this definition, that creativity is ability to modify self-imposed constraints. It starts with us and our own internal locus of control. And to move beyond, when I work with corporate audiences especially, I often hear the reason why I'm not creative, it's them. They're stopping me from being creative. It's the big bad bureaucracy, which is often true, but creativity starts with us and our own expression. So let's look at this, and let me give you an example of a self-imposed constraint, and I'm going to have you participate, because Craig told me that this audience would really enjoy a complex math problem. Right, Craig?
I know my audience.
You know your audience. So, can you see that number? Okay, prove to me you can see that number. Say that number out loud in unison. That number is? 1,000. Okay, so this is not going to be that complex. It's just addition. I'm going to bring up a series of numbers. You shout out the sum as we go. Ready? Okay, I needed some reply. Okay, the sum is?
1,040.
Okay, let's try it again, this time in unison. The sum is?
1,040.
Great. The sum is?
2,000. 2040.
The sum is?
2070.
The sum is?
3070.
The sum is?
3090.
Sum?
4090.
Sum?
5000.
Okay, so what was the predominant response I heard when we got to this last number? 5,000. The answer is 4,100. I don't feel bad. I've been doing this for decades. And almost every audience I work with and individuals in those audiences, 99.9% of them, when we get to this number 10, they say 5,000. Except for a group of French bankers, the top 100 executives, when we got to this number, they all shouted 6,000. About 3 months later, that bank was in the news. Banks don't make it in the news for good news. So what happened here? What happened here is I put you into a pattern, and how long did it take me to put you into that pattern? Seconds, right? So there were two-digit places you're working with, tens and thousands. Thousands and tens, thousands and tens, thousands and tens. Suddenly this 10 now introduces a new piece of information. It's novel. What did your mind do with that novelty? It rejected it. So creativity is the ability to overcome self-imposed constraints. One of the things that we have to be cautious of are the patterns that we get our minds into. We've always done it that way. That'll never work. Those are self-imposed constraints. The other reason why I like this definition is the word ability. Creativity is the ability to modify self-imposed constraints. Creativity is like any other ability. How many of you play a musical instrument? How about a sport? Been involved in a sport, committed to a sport. How about a hobby or a craft? How do you develop mastery in any of those areas? Practice. How else do you develop mastery? Imitation, learning. How else do you develop mastery? Instruction. You get coaching. You get feedback. Creativity is exactly the same. It's like all other abilities, which implies three things. It implies that we all have it. All people are creative. You can thank evolution for that. It's our competitive advantage. When you look at our species, we're not the strongest. We're not the fastest. We can't fly away from danger. How did we exist? How did we continue to exist on this planet with so many threats? Our ability to imagine, our ability to creatively solve problems, our ability to build. That's our competitive advantage. When I travel and I'm sitting next to someone on the airplane and we get into a conversation, what do you do for a living? And I say, I'm a professor. They might go a little further and say, well, what do you profess about? And I say, I profess about creativity. It breaks my heart, but about 80% of those individuals who respond to me when I say I'm a professor of creativity, their response is, oh, I'm not creative. Can't be. We all are blessed. We've all been gifted with an ability to imagine. This ability does vary. It's normally distributed. It's like all other abilities. When we measure it, it's a bell-shaped curve. But wherever you are on that curve, what we know is that creative thinking is trainable. It is teachable. And guess what you have to do? Get instruction, get feedback, practice, work hard at it. The Creativity Research Journal is one of the 12 referee journals in the field of creativity. One of the best papers I've read, and I consider it a seminal paper, was written by Scott Lawrence and Mumford out of the University of Oklahoma. They asked the question, can creativity be trained? They did a meta-analytic analysis of 70 different studies that had to meet certain standards of rigor. And they said the results obtained in the study indicate that well-designed training can evidence substantial external validity.
Creativity contributed to these areas. These are the areas that it impacted. Divergent thinking, which is the comment from the back, to be able to think laterally, to be a fluent thinker, a flexible thinker, to be an original thinker. Training definitely impacts that. When you get coaching, feedback, instruction, you can enhance your ability to be a divergent thinker. Training improves problem-solving skills, improves creative performance, and improves attitudes and behaviors, and for everyone, younger and older students, from working adults to high-achieving and even the run-of-the-mill students. It works for everyone. They go on to conclude, taken as a whole, these observations lead to a relatively unambiguous conclusion: creativity training works. I think there's another misnomer out there: you have it or you don't. You all have it. Are you reaching your potential? And one of the things that we do know from research is that, especially through cognitive training, you can enhance your creative thinking skills. So, classic definition, it was referred to in the presentations, the excellent presentations this morning. The universally accepted definition, the most commonly accepted definition of creativity in the literature is this: that its creativity is the production. It's not just thinking you're creative. How do we know someone's a great creator? We see the evidence of it. We see the manifestation of it. So creativity is the production of novel ideas or original ideas that are considered valuable. And this is why creativity is so rare. It's the union of two things that appear to be opposites. It's novelty that has value for the person, for a team, for an organization, or for all of society. And one of the reasons why I've been so busy lately, Teresa Mobley out of the Harvard Business School says that creativity is the springboard for innovation. 80% of organizations in the US have innovation in their mission, vision, or values. Just because you have it in your website or in your vision doesn't mean you're truly an innovative organization. You have to promote creative thinking. So innovation is a successful introduction of those new useful ideas. So you gave me some words and phrases in terms of what creativity is. Let me ask you this question. If creativity is lateral thinking, if creativity is hard work, if creativity is promoted by freedom, if it's playfulness, if it's thinking outside the box, whatever your discussion was, now talk with your partner. Why is it important? Why should you care? Why are we having this symposium on creativity? What's the bottom line value in terms of creativity? For a student, for a faculty member, for an institution of higher education, for our society, for the world? Why should we be concerned about creativity? Go ahead, have that conversation with your partner. I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, let me poll you again. I will share some response to this from the literature, but I'm curious to get your reaction. You're sitting here, you're listening to me talk about creativity. Broaden your lens. Why is it important for you as an individual, for a team, organization, for society, for the world? What's the value in creativity? Yes?
I think the first value is to survive. Like without it, it's not possible to survive.
Yeah.
And I also it adds value, depth, and happiness in our life, definitely. And the the last one, you can see yourself through somebody else's eyes. Just take a look at yourself through somebody else.
That's beautiful. And the literature actually supports everything you just shared. A book that I'm reading now called Staying Sharp says that creativity is good for well-being and also our physical health and our longevity. People who remain curious live longer and are more likely to put off such maladies as, I'm blanking on the name now, Alzheimer's. Maybe I'm suffering from Alzheimer's. So it ties into both physical and psychological well-being. I just wanted to underscore the point that you made. Others, how is it valuable? Why should you be concerned about creativity? Yes?
I think it helps with people being open-minded.
Yeah. Helps people to be more open-minded to ideas, more receptive of diversity, which does nothing but help society. I agree completely with that observation. Other reasons why it's important or valuable? Let's give someone else a chance. Another reason. Why should you care? Why should you be concerned? Yes?
Along with the survival concept, the idea of group cohesion, group identity through arts.
Yeah, it helps to create culture. Yeah, it contributes to that, for sure. So let's look at some of the literature around this. One of the reasons why we see creativity and innovation being touted is when you look at the economic periods that we've gone through, there's an argument that today that we live in the age of innovation. If you read Richard Florida's work, he says there's a creative class. In fact, he would say it's the age of creativity. So with that, we see more and more calls for creative thinking and creative problem solving, and I'll share some examples with you. And in fact, you have more at your disposal than I'll be sharing with you. When you came in, you should have received a table that has some of this captured for you. So one example is the P21 collaboration. It was a collaboration between thought leaders in education and in business. They were thinking about what are the skills necessary to be successful in the 21st century, and they came up with 3 categories. The first category they called learning and innovation skills, which included such things as problem solving and a category on creativity and innovation. The other skill sets were digital literacy, and then interesting, a third set called career and life skills, which included what are arguably traits of creative people, flexibility and adaptability, as well as leadership. Another example, this just came out, January of 2016, the World Economic Forum, which was attended by ministers of education, former prime ministers. Bill Clinton attended this meeting. They produced a report looking at the future of work, projecting to the year 2020, and the top 10 skills necessary for success in the year 2020. And you can see, oops, you can't see now, you can see creativity moved up the list in 2015 from being number 10 up to being the 3rd most important. But I would argue there are other skills on this list that nest under the concept of creativity, including complex problem solving, cognitive flexibility, judgment, and decision making. Those are related concepts to the broad concept of creativity. If you're familiar, if you're an educator and you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, Benjamin Bloom, who organized thinking from low-order thinking to high-order thinking, in 2001, Krathwohl, his student, reorganized these concepts, constructs of thought, and put creating at the highest level of thought. So how well is education responding to this demand? In some ways, I think not very well. It's almost as if we're ignoring the change that defines our times and not embracing it in our curriculum. And I think there's a perfect storm. And in fact, I have to be honest with you, I feel a bit frustrated. These reports come out regularly. In that table, you can see starting in 1990, 1991, the list of skills, and I would say they're more than just professional skills, they're life skills. There's, I think, a dozen reports on the table that you have. Every one of them includes creativity, creative thinking, or creative problem solving. So while the world is demanding it, I'm not sure how well education is preparing students for that world. Back in 1987, a national survey of U.S. universities, over 1,000 universities, 6% offered a formal course in creativity. Not sure it would be much better today. Don't know. A cross-disciplinary survey recently done of the top 6 universities in Ontario, looking at whether creative thinking was embedded as a student learning outcome. 600 and some faculty members responded to the survey. 33% of them included student creativity in their student learning outcomes. Wish it was higher. One of my colleagues did a survey looking at how many programs, academic programs, there were in creativity in the world. So scanning universities around the world, she found a total of 54. I think there's a perfect storm here. While the world is demanding, because of the age of innovation, that we help students to survive times of change, going back to what you shared about survival, how well are we developing their ability to be creative thinkers? These are skills desired by headhunters. This just came out, Bloomberg Business Week study that was put out last year. These are specifically focusing on recruiters who go into MBA programs. These are the top skills they're looking for. So these are the percentage of recruiters that included that skill among their top 5 most important skills. Creative problem solving, 42% said it was top 5 skill. When asked, what are the most difficult skills to find? Strategic thinking was number 1 and creative problem solving was number 2. So maybe we're not doing such a good job preparing students for this kind of a world. Once we join organizations, the picture doesn't get any prettier, and this is why I think there's a perfect storm. So perhaps education's not doing so well in terms of preparing students. This was a study done of human resource managers here in the US. They were asked, what are the top skills you're looking for? These are the top skills they're looking for. And then as a follow-up question, they were asked, if you hired someone and they were deficient in that skill, how prepared are you to develop that skill? 68.6% of HR managers said, if we hire someone who's deficient in creativity, we don't know how to develop it. This is the perfect storm. If we're not doing well as educators to develop this skill in students, when they get out into organizations, HR managers aren't certain how to develop it either. So how do you promote creativity? In the meta-analytic study that I introduced earlier, Scott, Lawrence, and Mumford said that the most successful programs were based on cognitive models. And the most successful program is called creative problem solving, which was developed by Alex Osborne, who invented brainstorming. Alex Osborne was earlier in the presentation. You remember him? Okay. So he not only developed brainstorming, but he developed an entire methodology called creative problem solving, which is a way of teaching creative thinking by providing individuals with cognitive tools that they can use repeatedly, individually or alone, individually or in collaboration, to enhance their creative output. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to creative problem solving. In its simplest form, creative problem solving involves 4 areas of thought. First, you have to clarify, what's the problem? A problem not stated well is difficult to solve. You're shooting in the dark. John Dewey, philosopher and educator, said that a problem properly stated is half solved. So creativity isn't just about coming up with ideas. It's first about asking good questions, being curious, framing issues, spotting opportunities. In the second step of the process, then we begin to play with possibilities, ideas that respond to that vision, that desired end, that challenge. And it's hard work, back to the point. There's a misnomer that creativity is simply brainstorming and producing ideas. In the third step of the process, and by the way, this is what all great creators do, they have to develop their ideas. They have to find the ideas that have the greatest potential, and they have to refine them. They have to make them elegant. This is where the sweat comes. And this is where, frankly, most people give up, because creativity is hard work. And then in the fourth step, I gave you the definition earlier, it's the production of original ideas that are valuable. In the fourth step, we bring them to fruition. We implement. We bring them to the world. We get others to accept and buy into our ideas. In creative problem solving, we teach our students tools in each of these areas. A tool that helps them to better clarify, to ask good questions. We teach them tools like brainstorming, forced connections, brainwriting, brain sketching, which is more visual, to help them to be more effective and playful at ideating ideas. We teach tools that help them to select and develop their most promising options, and we teach tools around how to create an action plan to bring your ideas to the world and to successfully sell your ideas. So that's a quick overview of creative problem solving. Now, what is the key, the hallmark to the creative process, and this gets into a bit of neuroscience, is this. Notice that every step of the process we use a diamond shape. That's not a random image, but that icon has meaning because it reflects how our brain works. 100,000 years ago, we developed the capacity to engage in two fundamental forms of thought. One form of thought represented by the top portion of the diamond is called divergent thinking. When you hear the word diverge, what does it make you think of? Divergent thinking. It's about diversity, having diverse options, thinking laterally, asking yourself, what else might I do? There are several abilities related to divergent thinking. One ability is called fluency, to be able to generate lots of thoughts, lots of options. Flexibility is the ability to generate different kinds of options so that your train of thought isn't on a single track, but it's covering many constructs, concepts, and a range of possibilities. The third quality of an effective divergent thinker is to go beyond what's familiar and to engage in original thinking. So fluency, flexibility, originality are the hallmarks of divergent thought. That's balanced off by, if you look at the diamond, where it begins to close down, is convergent thinking, which is evaluating, screening, selecting, developing, finding what will work. So 100,000 years ago, we developed the capacity to engage in these two forms of thought, but honestly, we often don't apply them maximally, optimally. Let me give you the classic example. The meeting. So you're in a meeting. Oh, by the way, there are 11 million meetings held daily in the US. Creativity can come through collaboration, but if we don't manage meetings well, rather than being productive, they can become dysfunctional. One of the dysfunctional qualities that I often see in problem-solving meetings is where we mix these two forms of thought. We use them together rather than focusing on one first, which we recommend diverging first, creating the menu of all the options, and then shifting into convergent thinking. So here's the example. Maybe you've been in a meeting like this before. The boss comes in, says, we have a difficult problem to solve. Let's come up with some ideas. Here's the issue. Here's a little background information. Anyone have any ideas? Someone suggests an idea. What's often the next comment made? You've been in meetings like that. That was a very quick reply. So what happens to the creativity? What happens to the divergence? What happens to the exploration when someone slams on the brake and says that'll never work? Do you see people shooting their arms up to share ideas? No. Premature criticism kills imagination. So the hallmark of creative problem solving is that first we spend dedicated time doing only one thing, diverging. What are all the options? What are all the possibilities? What are all the things that we can do? And then we shift into convergent thinking. Think about a car. Let me give you an analogy. Divergent thinking is like using the accelerator. Convergent thinking is like applying the brake. Where do you get the best fuel efficiency? Highway driving or city driving with a standard internal combustion engine? Highway. Why do you get better fuel efficiency on the highway? You get up momentum and you sustain that momentum. As soon as you apply the brake, you have to then burn fuel to get back to momentum. So the same thing is true in terms of creative thinking. When we engage in divergent thinking and then immediately we face criticism, it's like you're trying to drive the car, hitting the accelerator while someone else is applying the brake. It's not an efficient way of thinking, nor is it recommended for driving. And in fact, now the neuroscience shows that when we're engaged in divergent thinking, in unfocused thought, we are drawing on more connections in our brain. And when we begin to engage in criticism, we start to isolate specific spots in our mind. Our mind stops wandering. And mind wandering promotes creative thinking. So these are 4 principles that we teach our students to become more effective in divergent thinking. One of them, and the principal guideline, is to learn to suspend your judgment. I have an image here. For those of you who are writers, you'll recognize this man. This is, fill in the blank, Ernest Hemingway. So when Hemingway got up in the morning to write, he always began with free writing at his standing desk. He worked with pencils that had no erasers so that he didn't edit his thoughts. He believed that criticism too early in the writing process shut down imagination. So he would write in half sentences, no punctuation, incomplete thoughts. And once he had enough material, then he would move to his typewriter. Most students here have probably never seen a typewriter. He moved to his typewriter to then form his thinking and to shift into convergence. This is what great creators do. Convergent thinking is made up of these principles, with the key principle to use affirmative evaluation and to stay open to novelty. Most educational efforts, according to Mark Runco, focuses on convergent thinking and may do very little for divergent thought. So why should you care? Divergent thinking is the ability to generate many varied original options. You should care because when you compare divergent thinking to IQ, divergent thinking is 3 times stronger predictor of adult creative achievement. Those who get patents, those who have published books, those who become university presidents, those who become organizational leaders, it's not their IQ that predicts success, it's their ability to engage in divergent thinking. Because the more ideas you have, the more the likelihood is of success. This comes from Jonathan Plucker. He did an analysis of divergent thinking, the Torrance test of creative thinking, following students over a 30-year period. This comes from his analysis of that data. He says that the present reanalysis suggests that intelligence may be a component of creative achievement, but get this, but it is a relatively weak one when measures of divergent thinking are considered. Divergent thinking tests appear to be the best cognitive predictor of creative achievement. You want to have a creative, successful life? Practice divergent thinking, and the more you practice it, the more skillful you will become. In terms of leadership, it's a great predictor of leadership, even stronger than any personality variable that's been assessed. This comes from the military. Zaccaro and Mumford examined senior leaders in the military. They gave them a military problem to solve, and when they looked at how well that correlated against their solutions, divergent thinking had the largest correlations to the problems, the solutions they came up with to those problems. So should you care about divergent thinking? Well, it's a predictor of success. It's also a predictor of well-being. both psychological and physiological. I was going to jump into a study that we just completed. We call it the bus study. I'm not going to take you through the slides, but we just did a research study with 100 groups in which we gave them a transportation issue in Buffalo. The suburbanites tend not to use public transportation. The Niagara Frontier Association came to us and said, hey, can you help us generate some ideas on how we can get more people from the suburbs to take the bus? I want to show you one thing out of this study. You can see I was going to show you a number of other slides. I'll end with this slide. So in total, we had 100 groups to work with. What I've done is I've sliced out one part of our table. This was groups that had no training, where they were following 3 different instructional conditions: brainstorming, traditional brainstorming where they were encouraged to critique each other, and a control group where they weren't given any instructions on how to generate ideas. Now we've compared in this table a baseline group in which they had 50 minutes and no process. They were not given divergent and convergent phases. In these 3 groups, they were told to take 20 minutes first to only generate ideas, and then 30 minutes to evaluate. So they had a 50-minute period. So you remember that diamond? They followed a process that we gave them. And by following that simple process, when you compare these 3 types of groups to our baseline group, where they were given the brief, they got the exact same material the other groups were given, but get this, they weren't told how to manage their time. They were not given a process. They relied on whatever experience they had already had. And when you look across, remember I said earlier that divergent thinking is made up of fluency, the abilities to be fluent, flexible, and original. When you look at the mean scores for fluency for those groups that weren't given a process, they generated less than half the ideas than groups that were given a process, and they had 50 minutes. These groups only had 20 minutes. So on average, these no process groups generated about 22 ideas. You know what happened? You often had the vocal person or the expert, or no, we can't do that. That's impossible. We don't have the money for that. So they were trying to drive their car while someone else was applying the brake. In terms of flexibility, less flexible, and look at originality. Much less original. And when experts evaluated the creativeness of their solutions, they were much less creative. So does process work? It does. Not only individually, but we can also see in terms of collaboration. With that, I'm going to share with you some resources to go forward with. So invite you to visit our website. I barely scratched the surface. In our website, we have a series of videos that delve into basic topics in the field of creativity. As Martha mentioned, if you're interested in the connection between creativity and leadership, there's our book, Creative Leadership. We do public workshops. Our next public workshop is on October 21st. It's a one-day introduction to creative thinking. And if you're familiar with the great courses, there's a series of videos that have 24 30-minute modules that I did with the teaching company called the Creative Thinkers Toolkit. So thank you for having me. Unfortunately, I would love to stick around and answer questions, but I have a flight at 2 o'clock back to Buffalo because I teach a graduate class tonight. So there's a flyer here if anyone's interested in information on our graduate program. And you're certainly welcome to, I invite you to email me if you want to follow up or if you have any questions. So thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate it.